I think it's one of the great sports institutions in the country, and I think that the 80s even enhanced the reputation of the Big Five.
If you didn't beat anybody, you wanted to beat a Big Five school. That's basically what happened.
It's unbelievable to describe a packed palestra. It was definitely exciting.
We banged a lot, we went at it back and forth a lot, and I think, again, it was a matter of mutual respect when it was all over and done.
There is a wealth of energy that continues to brew as far as Big Five is concerned, because everybody wants to have the bragging rights.
The Philadelphia Big Five, filled with generations of tradition, yet an embattled institution. 5 universities, each with its own mission, both academically and athletically, yet still inextricably linked. On Hawk Hill on this chilly November's eve, each player, each coach come together, largely to celebrate that tradition. It is the only night all year when everyone gathers to feel the bond, the unity of purpose. Yes, the Big Five has changed. Each school has its own home floor, its own conference, its own goals. But on this night at least, history serves as a great reminder.
When basketball, college ball is talked about around the country, the first thing that always comes up is the Big Five. It'll be a chance to continue that series into the 90s, and you people will be there doing it.
But first, we must look back. On the hardwood, the 80s have been a golden era, filled with remarkable accomplishments, a time of celebration filled with vivid images of City Series basketball. The numbers tell the story of Pennsylvania's decade of despair. Not a single winning season in Big Five play, an 11-game losing streak, 0 for the decade against St. Joseph's, and the recipients of the era's worst drumming. But it wasn't so long ago that Penn was among America's finest. The Quakers closed the 70s on a magic carpet ride, a run through the NCAA tournament that ended in the Final Four. Yet Ivy pride led to some embarrassment. Academic standards came under new scrutiny, questioning the Penn players as not molded in the true Ivy tradition. The Ivy League changed, and Penn was forced to change with it. Tighter admission standards, restructured financial aid packages, even further limitation of coaching staffs.
I thought that was a step backward for the league because I thought we were really starting to progress. I thought it was an important step for the Ivy League to show everybody that we could compete, and yet we could do it within the framework of what was handed to us academically. I didn't think it was a negative. I didn't think our alumni felt it was a negative. But the bottom line is there has been a reduction in the type of attitude that the Ivy League has prevailed with as far as who they want to compete against in basketball.
The shifting philosophy left the Quakers to fight City Series wars with lesser artillery. The final Weinauer recruits left Penn with enough talent to be competitive, and in the early 80s, players like Paul Little and Kenny Hall provided just an occasional triumph.
9 seconds, you see it. Here's a shot by Hall. He sticks it in.
By mid-decade, the transition was nearly complete. Weinauer had left Penn for Arizona State. New coach, former player Craig Littlepage, was left to try and win within new restrictions. His first major recruit would typify the 80s.
From Scarsdale, New York, Bruce Lefkowitz.
By his own admission, Bruce Lefkowitz had less talent, less pure athletic ability than his counterparts around the city. From 1984 through 87, Lefko's Quakers specialized in hard work and heartbreak.
We played real tough. We played real hard. I mean, I think to some extent I played a little bit over my ability level. And I looked at those games as challenges.
Challenging, yes, and frustrating, too. The Penn losing streak reached double figures by 85. Lefkowitz says he did not want to be remembered as the class that never won a Big Five game. His lone victory would come against LaSalle. Playing a near flawless first half, the Quakers hung on for a 6-point win. From December '82 until the end of the '88 season, Penn would win just 3 City Series games, all against LaSalle.
Some of the troubles that we've had in the past few years is really adapting into a type of kid, developing a type of student athlete that we're going to recruit. And I think more and more you're going to see a return to the type kid, you know, that can play competitive Division I basketball and can also bring something to the school and, you know, to his family and his community as well.
And on Magic Nights, it can all still come together as it did in the unchallenged upset of the decade.
What a moment for Pennsylvania basketball.
The anatomy of an upset. It usually requires a quick start, a jolt of confidence for the underdog.
It is 11-0 Pennsylvania, and Raleigh Massimina needs a timeout.
Sparkling work from a senior statesman.
Frazier for 3! Unbelievable!
And yeoman duty from an unexpected source.
Big rebound by Jose Tavares. You have a stunned Villanova bench. They're absolutely stunned.
Then, finally, exaltation.
It's over! The Penn Quakers erupt!
The same pairing provided another evening of high drama in December 1982. This Villanova squad would eventually reach the Midwest Finals in March, playing a Pennsylvania team that would fail to win the Ivy League. Villanova featured Pinone, Granger, and the youngsters who would eventually find the promised land. But on this night, the magic formula worked again. The quick start. A brilliant night for Paul Little. Whoa! And clutch foul shooting from Little Anthony Arnoli. And the Quakers had pulled it off once more. Pennsylvania has also been on the receiving end of the decade's most demoralizing defeat. It came against a Temple team destined for the #1 ranking, and it was over early. Temple would score the game's first 24 points. It took Penn 8 minutes to score. Mercifully, it ended a 34-point Temple victory. And how does a team score 82 points and still lose by 35?
It's dunk night for the Wildcat.
The '82 Villanova Wildcats put on the decade's most awesome offensive display against the LaSalle Explorers. The most points scored in the decade, 117. They have served as bookends for a decade of success. What began as the Michael Brooks era.
Michael Brooks is just an awesome talent. He plays very well with other people. He has no weaknesses. He's unbelievably strong, so he never tires. It's just a pleasure to coach and be around.
Closes as Lionel's time.
Lionel's certainly going to make his mark on Big Five and Philadelphia basketball and LaSalle basketball.
Brooks and Simmons, the power, the grace. They've combined for 3 Big Five MVP awards. But the '80s Explorers have not been just a two-man show. The years have been filled with great individual talent. The smoothness of Ralph Lewis. The quickness of Doug Overton. The electricity of Stevie Black. This wealth of talent never led to city dominance, but on particular evenings,
Lynham trying to get comfortable. Here's the shot. It is good. Oh, brother. Now what can Villanova do? No timeouts. Sinkowitz, he tries. He can't get it. It's a LaSalle win.
Kevin Butch Lynham had done it. The Explorers upset the Wildcats 84-83 in triple overtime. 1984, LaSalle would earn a share of the city title in a memorable clash with a nationally ranked Temple team. LaSalle leading in the final seconds of overtime. Chip Greenberg with a chance to ice it.
Make it 7 seconds left. Stansbury will have more seconds. He's got to do something with it. It's good. It is good.
And I just remember Truck's face at the bottom of the basket saying, "Oh no, it's going in," and it did go in, and it was just It was just something that I never felt before. It was a double overtime. The fans were roaring. It was just pandemonium, and we came out on top. And that was the important part.
They won it in double overtime by a single point, their only victory over Temple in the 80s. It was to be a harbinger of better days ahead, but in an obscure NCAA ruling, senior center Albert Truck Butts was ruled ineligible for the following year. Lewis shouldered most of the weight.
I think Villanova was our biggest rivalry, and we beat them that previous year. So the following year was like we were ready for them, and they won the championship. And at times I would say, I wonder how it would have been if Truck was there. But I mean, you could put all the ifs and buts in there, but they won the championship, and congratulations to them. But I think about that, and it was a dismal part of my career.
Head coach Lefty Irvin would resign a year later, and a new era would be born.
The Big Five is an excellent basketball tradition in Philadelphia. A lot of great players come out of the Big Five, and hopefully I can be one.
Lionel and Speedy, now eternally linked. Local high school legends stepping up, and LaSalle had them. Their first visit to DuPont Pavilion, a hard-fought victory, most memorable for a pop of a Morris scene and heroics from wife Mimi.
Well, I was happy I had clean underwear on. That was my first thought. And she was in at halftime. As I'm talking to the team, you know, I'm in my skivvies, and she's sewing my pants. They were, you know, trying to be serious and listen to what I'm saying, but they're kind of laughing, I'm sure, to themselves, trying not to let it out. But the funny part about that is, she ran out of thread and got a safety pin and sewed it up. So I went out. The second half began. We turned it over immediately. I jumped up. The safety pin broke, stabbed me right, you know where, and the pants split back open again. So that was quite a night.
LaSalle would be shut out in City Series play the following year and still reach the NCAA tournament. Then claim a share of the title in '89. In both seasons, Simmons was named the city's finest player.
That probably stands out more than any of the accolades that I can receive, because it's being recognized, you know, in your hometown as being the best.
He was the ultimate streak shooter. LaSalle Stevie Black connected for the decade's top individual performance. In fact, the only player to reach 40 points in a City Series contest. On nights like this, Black was nearly unstoppable. But this 40-pointer against the Temple Owls was not enough. The Explorers still lost in overtime.
It's very important to the players here. It's very important to our community to fare well in the Big Five.
No matter how the St. Joseph's Hawks have fared in this decade, the City Series record has rarely suffered. In fact, the Hawks have never lost more than 2 in a row. Opening the decade in classic style, the Hawks went undefeated, winning 4 games by a total of 7 points. This archive footage from the 1980 Villanova game shows Brian Warwick clinching the undisputed City Series title.
I touched the ball and I passed it back to Luke Griffin, and at that time John Smith came around and set a screen for me, and Luke Griffin faked the pass to Mike Morrow and passed it back to myself, and I was fortunate enough to make that shot. It's unbelievable to describe the packed palestra. I mean, they say it holds 9,000, but everyone believes there was 10,000 in the house that night. It was just screaming. It was chaos in there after that. It was definitely exciting.
Warwick had 13 game-winning buckets in his distinguished career, and his Big Five experiences helped make the Hawks tournament tough in '81, winning 25 games and staging the upset heard round the basketball universe. NCAA Round 2, trailing the top-ranked DePaul Blue Demons by a point in the closing seconds. Skip Dillard missing a foul shot that could have iced it.
Look at this! St. Joseph's has the ball back! 7 seconds! Look at this! Look at this! They win! St. Joseph's win!
And years later, that game has had far-reaching effects on many who took part. Not only the man who coached the Hawks, but the man who missed the shot.
This past summer, I was watching 60 Minutes one Sunday night, and they do a piece on Skip Dillard from a penitentiary in the state of Illinois. And as I'm sitting watching this, Skip Dillard is looking forward to the day when he's going to leave this penitentiary. He's in for armed robbery. And he says in the course of this interview, which is a 20-minute piece on 60 Minutes, that his life changed, took a turn for the worse the day that he missed a foul shot in the NCAA tournament. And I don't know that I'll ever forget that, in fact, I was sitting by myself down at the shore watching that. And, you know, it's the flip side of the coin.
Through the mid-'80s, the Hawks cast a large shadow in City Series play. Local players brought intensity to each contest, as Tony Costner became the school's all-time leading scorer. Rodney Blake filled his vacated low post spot with even greater ferocity. The graceful wing play of Bob Lejeski, and the guard line, the fearless bruiser Flint, hard-nosed Jeff Arnold, and the thoroughbred Maurice Martin kept the Hawks constantly in the thick of the City Series title hunt. In fact, 1989 was the only losing City Series record of the decade. Yet the Hawks still saved the best for the Cats from the main line. The rivalry between the Hawks and the Wildcats has an intensity all its own.
7 seconds. Here's Brown in the open floor.
He's going to go one-on-one.
He's in the air. It's good. At the buzzer.
The Hawks have beaten them.
The Hawks always had something special for the Wildcats. A mid-'70s tradition was revived in Skinheads, the sequel, the only easy Hawks win. 4 years later, the Razor's edge once more, and the Skinheads would go 3 for 3. The Wildcats were the masters of the overtime victory. 1984, the athleticism of Ed Pinckney was the difference. 1987, a double overtime masterpiece centered on senior Harold Jensen. Jensen would recover a loose rebound and force overtime. Bruiser Flint created a second overtime with an end-to-end dash. A tough baseline Jensen jumper had the Cats ahead late in overtime number 2. Yet Jensen remembers he was nearly the GOAT.
The very end of the game, when Jack Concannon missed the easy one underneath, and I would have gotten screamed at if they looked at the film because that was my man. Really? And I kind of got pushed aside, and we were all scrambling underneath. And when you're playing a man-to-man, which we were at that time, you got to find your man and box him out or forget it. And that's one mistake I made towards the end of the game that could have cost us that game, and fortunately it didn't.
And standing in bold relief, another magical evening, the Spectrum 1985. The Wildcats a win away from an undisputed city title.
Wayne McLean, contact made, the shot is good.
I think after that game we realized what we had just faced, and you know, there are some games that I won't say you don't mind losing, but it's more palatable, and that was one. We knew that we just played one of the very best teams in the country, and we felt they had to play their best to beat us.
It is no surprise that each school's brightest achievements have come against Rollie Massimino's Villanova Wildcats. Simply stated, they've never been an underdog, they've always been the hunted. The Wildcats had the most success on the national stage, claiming the ultimate prize in 1985. As the decade opened, Daddy Maz had greatly expanded his recruiting base. His first dominant star, 3-time Big Five MVP, John Pinone.
He got more out of his body because of his heart and his desire to succeed than most players I've seen, ever. Because he wasn't extremely talented. He can't run, he can't jump, he can't shoot, but he just could play.
Pinone was succeeded by Pinckney, the McLeans, Presley, Jensen, and Plansky, all from New York, Connecticut, or Massachusetts. Coach Mass knew they came to Villanova for the Big East. They did not have Big Five roots, so it was left to the coaching staff to prepare each player for the warfare ahead.
It took them a few years to believe that, because they were part of Philadelphia, they were part of Center City. They met people from other colleges in the city, became friends with, and then they finally said, hey, you know, this is important.
It crystallized with the class of '85. The precursor to the national title was the Wildcats' only undefeated City Series mark of the decade.
We put down goals at the beginning of the season every year, and one is always to try and get to the NCAA tournament, to work as hard as we can and hopefully win our conference or win our league championship. But number one that year was to win the Big Five, and they hadn't done it, and this was, it was their going away party that year. So that was every bit as important as any of the other goals that year, was to win the Big Five.
The goal was achieved on the Spectrum hardwood. Just weeks later, the Delaware Valley paid its tribute to this most memorable championship team. A new era would follow, opening their own building, the DuPont Pavilion. And yet the Cats have a losing Big Five record on their new home floor. In the late 80s, they would rejoin the national rankings as Mark Plansky provided the spark. This win over LaSalle was followed by the apex of City Series basketball in the 80s. It more than lived up to its advanced billing.
Mark making the baseline running slam.
For the first time ever, a Big Five team was ranked number 1. The Temple Owls hosting the 20th ranked Villanova Wildcats. 40 minutes of non-stop, electrified college basketball.
We just had great play out of everyone on the floor.
Oh, what a pass to Perry.
It was played as good as a pro game.
In your face from Tom Bryce.
The Wildcats came to play, scoring the opening 8 points. Doug West owned the perimeter, scoring 20 in the first half. Kenny Wilson would score a career high and run the show with precision. But the Owls' Howie Evans was flawless, en route to a school assist record. The Owls took Nova's best punch and left with a 1-point halftime lead.
Rolly and I were, only thing we did was just look at each other. Sometimes I was ready to call timeout. If I saw Rolly calling timeout, I'd snatch my hands back. I wouldn't call, try to get him to use his up and vice versa. He'd do the same thing.
In the second half, a Mike Breeswick three-pointer put the Owls on top to stay. And down the stretch, All-American freshman Mark Macon took over.
Macon outruns Kenny Wilson.
Clearly a night when it was a shame that somebody had to lose. A Big Five game to cherish for all time. At Temple University, winning has become more than an attitude. It is a way of life. Under Coach John Chaney, the Owls have won or shared the last 4 city titles. As the decade opened, though, the emergence of a national power on North Broad Street would have been hard to predict. Coach Don Casey had continued Harry Litwack's winning tradition, posting winning seasons against a representative Eastern schedule. It all began to change, though, with the arrival of John Chaney. His first edition had promise, till the loss of workhorse Granger Hall. It became a perimeter team, not always deadly, but always dangerous.
Still 4 seconds to go. Now McLaughlin from 5-point range. He hits it. Holy mackerel.
Jim McLaughlin teamed with Terrence Stansbury to give Chaney his first Big Five win.
Here's Clifton's long pass. Stansbury has it. Makes it.
The following year, Hall returned with a vengeance. He and Stansbury combined for a share of the city title. Terry would become the school's all-time leading scorer. Not coincidentally, a perfect player arrived on campus that season. From Southern High, Nate Blackwell. In his 4 years, the Owls won 108 games. 1987, Blackwell's senior year. The Big Five season opened December 2nd.
That day, I was feeling ill. I was kind of sick. I had a stomach virus, and I'd been saying to myself all day, well, we're playing LaSalle. I'm going to go out here and get Timmy and Ramon into the game early, get those guys going, and we should have an easy time of it in the second half.
He could not have been more wrong.
Tar inside finds Robinson, his further penetration, and a good shot by Robinson with 1 second left, and it's all fallen in place for the Explorers here in the first half.
And I remember going and walking away from halftime, and I'm saying, wow, I'm looking up at the scoreboard, and I'm saying, we're down 20 points. So we go in at halftime, and Coach he's giving it to us. And I remember coming out to myself, and we had just got nationally ranked, and I remember saying
I was thinking to myself, this is my last year. It had happened to me before where we were nationally ranked and then came out and lost a game and got knocked out of it. So I said to myself, well, I can't allow this to happen. You know, not in my senior year, I can't allow this to happen.
Be it talent or sheer force of will, Nate did not allow it to happen, pouring home shot after shot to lead the Owls back.
You know how it is. When you're hot sometimes, and when you're not, you're not. And it was my afternoon.
His 33rd and final point iced the win. It would begin a streak of 8 consecutive City Series victories, the longest streak of the decade. Tim Perry would emerge as Chaney's most dominant low-post player. Mark Macon would arrive, the most highly touted recruit in Temple's history, and team with Howard Evans to lead the Owls to #1. Temple now is also a national program, but Chaney has not lost sight of the value of the rivalries in his own backyard.
The Big Five continues to grow, even though each of us are serving different masters. We find we're in different conferences with different rules, different kinds of goals. We find that the ultimate goal still remains that everybody would like to get into postseason play. You win your conference, concentrate and focus on your conference, you get into postseason play. But by the same token, there's a balance that exists there, and that balance of energy exists in directing a great deal of your thoughts, your concerns, and energies toward the Big Five championship.
The talent level in the Big Five has reached an all-time high. A panel of media members was charged with the task of choosing the very best. Though playing only one season this decade, Michael Brooks received nearly unanimous support. The National Player of the Year in 1980, Brooks was a consensus All-American, passing the legendary Tom Gola as LaSalle's all-time leading scorer. The only 3-time winner of the Big Five MVP award, John Pinone was an All-American his senior season and a 2-time academic All-American. He scored over 2,000 points, led the Cats in scoring all 4 years, and reached the Final 8 twice. This multi-skilled performer, Ed Pinckney, scored nearly 2,000 points and was named the Big Five MVP in '85. And he saved his best for last, performing flawlessly in the biggest game of them all as Villanova topped Georgetown to win the national championship. This consummate Philadelphia lead guard, Nate Blackwell, helped pioneer the Owls' return to national prominence. He scored over 1,700 points, 3rd on the Owls' all-time list, and was named the Big Five MVP in '87. Since deciding to stay in Philadelphia and attend LaSalle, Lionel Simmons has lived a storybook. The lone unanimous selection to the team of the decade, Lionel is a 2-time Big Five MVP and more. He's led LaSalle's resurgence and fulfilled his destiny as one of Philadelphia's best players ever. And so we prepare to close the book on this dynamic decade of Big Five basketball, and we're left with change. There are no more streamers, no more magical nights of doubleheader basketball here at the Palestra. 5 different schools, 5 different directions. Yet we're left with the knowledge that the Big Five remains part of the texture and fabric of this city, and often the games are pure magic. The lesson that playing for pride, for bragging rights, will always have a value all its own. Pervasive images as the 90s beckon.